Our next speaker is Ashley Helmholtz, and Ashley is going to talk about gardening in a warming world. Ashley works as the board leader for Cornell garden-based learning. Ashley's background is in sustainable planning, environmental education, and civic engagement processes focused on food systems and gardening projects. She has an urban planning and environmental studies bachelor's from Michigan State University and applied research in human environment relations from Cornell University. She's worked with national and regional nonprofits like Earth Force and the Southeast Michigan Stewardship Coalition, as well with local government, sustainability, and farmers market management, developing new grants and education programs on food security, climate change, and community gardens. She's excited to support professional development resources for Master Garden Volunteer and Seed to Supper programs. Programs she supports include Seed to Supper and the Master Gardener program. Thank you for being with us today, Ashley.
Well, thank you. And this is actually a good presentation to happen after Jenny's, but it's also kind of like climate change 101 and how to communicate it. So we're going to be talking a little bit more about the social science side of talking about gardening in a warming world today. And just want to give some credit to those that put this together. Mary Walsh from Cooperative Extension of Monroe County, Lori Brewer, and Annie Christian Reuter were all part of this curriculum. So I know this is a really tough time of day after eating and then sitting back down again. So I want to just explain that normally when we do presentations in Cornell Garden-Based Learning, it's all about facilitation and a back and forth, because that's how you reach audiences, not by coming up as the expert and telling them everything they need to know, but actually engaging in a dialogue. And I'm not going to do that today because we don't have the time. But I'm going to share what I would normally do in the ways we would engage an audience in these topics, so that it's about building trust and building accountability between those in the audience and you. So bear with me as I try to do this. So today we always start off with learning objectives, and this is really important so that we get on the same page about what we're talking about. And I'm really going to be, again, train the trainer here. I know I'm talking to the choir, and I want to teach the choir to sing. That's what we're going to be talking about. So these are the learning objectives that we would normally do in about, again, the first one and the last one in a 30-minute session, but there's longer sessions you can do this in, up to 2.5 hours. So because we're in an IPM conference, we're also going to focus on some IPM specific tools for thinking about gardening in a warming world. So this might be a repeat for knowledge that you know, but please bear with me. So normally what we would do in that first session, right, we hope to do this in a smaller group, maybe 15 to 20 people, have folks get together and talk about their own personal experiences. So this grounds climate change in very much that real world experience of what they observe. So we would ask them, like in this picture, what have you observed in your garden? What are the challenges you're having related to climate change? What are maybe some things that are benefiting your garden from doing this, from having climate change happen in your garden? So this is their opportunity to, again, ground in their own personal experience, and then we'll connect from that point. Kind of a sense of what do they know? That's a great way to get a sense of what the room knows, where they're coming from. And that, as a presenter, helps you to take the next steps into presenting some basic information. And also grounding in why we do this is really important too. This is one of our values here at Cornell Cooperative Extension, that teaching about climate change is really key. And again, that backing kind of helps back you up as well in your presentation. I've worked with a lot of skeptics, and that's okay. And I think having room for that and being able to talk about it is actually what's missing in our country right now. So keeping that in mind, that's partly how this was constructed, to think about those social science ways of engaging communities and conversations. So another beginning element of our curriculum is talking about systems thinking. And one way we do that is by asking the audience, what do you see when you look at a forest? So again, we've talked a lot about today, again, all the connections between all the elements of an ecosystem, but oftentimes, sometimes people don't see the see it that way. By framing this, I guess, using this photo and this kind of idea of thinking about systems thinking, we get people to start appreciating the interconnections and the relationships between elements in an ecosystem, and that's almost more important than the individual elements themselves. So you would not have a forest if you only had one tree or you only had a chipmunk. You've got to have the whole package, and they have to be in relationship. And that's just as important with the relationship with your community. Sometimes we talk about sustainability and climate change as if it's happening over here and we're over there, and somehow we're not interconnecting. But this activity we have about systems thinking is about reframing that so that we as the human element is really a part of the climate change conversation. Then we actually get into the science. And this is the part that sometimes you lose people. I really think that showing people some of these maps, giving them a sense of, again, what is the difference between weather and climate is really critical, because sometimes we'll hear from folks, yeah, well, the weather was really, really, really cold. How is the climate warming? It's the overall trend, right? It's those 30-year statistics on climate change that we want them to look at. And we want to connect to something that gardeners will really take to heart. So we talk a lot about the hardiness zones and how that's one feature of, again, a sense of your climate in your region and how it's changing. Another one is the frost-free season. Again, that's a great benchmark to talk about with your constituents. A great tool too that you can point them to, again, to kind of get that more weather-based assessment of where we are with climate. You can look at growing degree day calculators to understand those frost-free days and how it impacts the phenology of the local landscape, and when buds are blooming, when you're going to have certain pests arrive. Again, this is a tool that they can use. They don't have to do the math themselves. They can find out a little bit more about the science directly themselves. Of course, everybody knows the plant hardiness zone map, but something to think about as well is that, again, that growing degree day tool is used in understanding what are those different zones where they can grow different plants. So we get back to that right plant, right place idea, but also we can think about, again, what's coming, right? And where have we been? And that gives them context to think about, okay, 1960 to 1990, these were the plant hardiness zones, obviously on average colder than what we're seeing and predicting to see up into 2040 to 2060. So showing them this map, this is something that all gardeners use, is a really good touchstone for talking about this issue. This is another obvious one we can talk about, but the ones I've highlighted there, carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide, are actually where gardeners can have real impact. And so this has been studied nationwide. What is the phrase that gets people to think about climate change in a way that's non-controversial? And the phrase that has worked the best across different ages and backgrounds and political spectrums is the heat trapping blanket metaphor. And so that's one of them. The other one is osteoporosis of the oceans if you're by the ocean. So that's another good one to use. But if you have skeptical folks, talking about it in those terms in particular is really important. Methane, the reason I'm highlighting those, methane and nitrous oxide, methane is, of course, from decomposition, and many of our landfills emit methane from, again, gardeners are putting potentially leaves and other organic matter into the landscape, into the landfill. And that's 25 times more potent than CO2. And nitrous oxide, which is again a byproduct of fertilizers, can be 300 times more potent than CO2. So these are, again, areas where gardeners actually can make an impact. And so drawing their attention to something beyond just carbon is actually really another way you can kind of reach them. Of course, we are observing the signs of climate change impacts in garden systems, and the frost-free season length important piece to talk about. So the fact that we're getting about 10 more additional days in our seasons in the Northeast will, again, be something that they can relate to in their own personal experiences. Of course, this is also another area where we can show them every season is showing warming on average, but especially winters. And many people can relate to that sense that the winters are warming at a faster rate in our area than the other seasons. And you can actually look, obviously, at the data to prove that. This is one I think that also can be kind of misleading. Looking at a 71% increase that we've seen in heavy precipitation events, some folks might say, we have drought out here. This isn't right. When you talk about it also within the context of winters, where a lot of these heavy precipitation events are happening, that can also help to ground people in their own personal experience. Because we aren't just seeing these heavy precipitation events, we're also seeing drought. And I put this up as this is a new slide, but just making folks aware that these kind of flash drought conditions that we're experiencing have been more predominant in the last few years. In 2016, 2016 to 2022, we've seen this happen again and again. So again, we're seeing more large precipitation events, and when we do have them, they're going to be like, the heavier precipitation events, not necessarily consistent. So what does this all mean, and how might it matter to gardeners? Of course, we talked about this, but earlier leaf bloom and events, we can talk about, again, things like earlier blooms of the cherry trees in Washington, DC, something you can observe, or even things that are observed in a lab. For instance, like the spreading of invasives like poison ivy. We talked a little bit about that at the break. Poison ivy actually is predicted to increase along with a lot of other weeds because they have the genetic diversity to be able to adapt to climate change better. So knowing these kinds of things, bringing up examples of real ways this might impact them. Interacting species. We've talked a little bit about phenology, and that's a little bit more of a nuanced conversation, but we can talk to them about, when are you seeing blooms of certain plants? When are you seeing certain bugs in your garden? Of course, the range expansion of certain pests is a real concern, and specifically insect pests, and relaxed cold limitation is preventing them from being, I guess, controlled by the local environment as well. So these are the ones highlighted here, some of the IPM focused changes that we're seeing that I wanted just to bring up. But also, something that relates to a lot of people, that plants are going to produce more pollen, and that impacts a lot of folks with allergies. So again, how does this matter to you? And as a gardener, a lot of these matter to folks. Of course, native beneficial habitat, we've talked a lot about this today. This is no surprise, but again, for beginning gardeners, for those that are starting out in this idea around gardening in a warming world, it's good to talk to them about what are native beneficial insect habitats and why do they matter. And of course, again, getting back to more of the human element of this, there's a lot of other benefits that these habitats can create for cities in particular. Climate resiliency, stormwater management, the heat island effect is bigger in cities. So again, they're already experiencing a higher amount of climate change than we are in some of the more suburbs and rural areas. Obviously the ecological health, but what about the mental health as well? Having nearby nature actually improves our social and our mental health. Environmental health, of course, air and water quality. I just talked about that a little bit with the pollen piece, but having more plants has the potential to improve those as well. And then, of course, like Kathy Lewis was talking about, the aesthetics of your neighborhood. There's so many benefits there for our local community development. But I think the most interesting fact that I've learned is about carbon storage of native meadows in particular, and how much they store below ground. What a cool diagram to show you that just by planting plants that are native to our areas, and many of these are also beneficial insect habitat. We can actually, in some studies, 1 ton of carbon in an acre. I'm sorry, I got that wrong. Having a hard time seeing my slides. Yeah, one ton of carbon in soils and roots in soil per year. We also have IPM climate change tools around invasive weeds and pest threats and their expansion. So thinking about the invasive range expansion tools that we have, we can learn a little bit more about where are we going to see certain pests in the future, and where might we want to predict and potentially adapt to them. All right, I'm going to move all those lovely people from over here. Technical difficulties, could you help me with that? Thank you. So now in this last part of the curriculum, we get into actually what can you do about it? So we go into something called a climate smart sustainable garden audit. And we define and ask folks, what do you think mitigation means? And what do you think adaptation means? Because both are important. And, all of our garden activities fall into one of those two categories. And we actually have some of the common ones in kind of a worksheet, and we'll let people figure out, is it mitigation? Is it adaptation? And they do this in a group setting. So it's a great way to get people to think about these terms and then find out, what am I actually doing that's either helping this problem or helping me to have a better garden in the face of this problem. Oh, there we go. So these are the big categories. Again, you'll see some commonalities here with what Jenny presented. These are all the areas where we provide some information, background information in our course book, and then some best practices. So I'm not going to go through all of these today, but I think what's the big thing is cultivating a dialogue and understanding that we need these principles of climate change communication to really get across to folks that they have power and they have spheres of influence, and that we are multipliers. Our master gardeners, who I work with across the state, they multiply to so many other gardeners in their community. If you think about 2,500 master gardeners and all the people they reach, we can really make an impact on all those folks who have lawns and landscapes that could be really changed for the better. Again, I'm not going to go through a ton of this, but this is all in our book. And again, this is kind of the 101 place. We don't tell you how to do all of this. You'll have to have Jenny's book to find out how to do all of this. But many of these are things you've heard today. Again, leaving grass clippings, composting, recycling. This is basic stuff, but it's a checklist to go through, and telling people how to do it is really key. That's where Jenny's book is going to be very helpful in that respect, and knowing when to do it and all of that kind of nitty gritty aspects of it. Another piece is, of course, soil health and management, and all the same things we've talked about today, but integrating legumes, keeping the soil cover crops, all benefit the soil microbiome and allow us to absorb carbon in the soil at the same time as we're creating all these other benefits. So we do talk a little bit about that soil food web and how it's all connected. Okay, water management and conservation. We haven't talked a ton about this today, but analyzing your garden for sources and sinks, choosing plants suited to site conditions, and then really observing, as gardeners do, where those plants are thriving or not thriving. There's plenty of really great resources on building rain gardens that are out there, and we have some of them I'm going to talk about in a second. But we go into a little bit of that background. All right, so this is something we've heard a lot about today, but I just wanted to, again, reiterate that a lot of this information is out there. Sometimes the hardest part is just having the time to talk about with others. How do I do this in a simple and cost-effective way often? So we're really focused on, in this manual, again, reaching people that normally wouldn't be the early adopters at this stuff. So thinking about, again, what are some ways you can integrate plants, pollinator plants into your current vegetable garden, making them aware that we have a pollinator protection plan, and then, of course, getting them ready and thinking about what are invasive pests and diseases. This is a great thing. If you have a chance to come to Cornell, you can check out a really cool alternative lawn that integrates some woodland and meadow herbs and some grasses and sedges that are native. And again, just giving people that idea that there are other alternatives and ways of doing things that are attractive. We talked about that earlier. Public gardens are doing this. And then, of course, plant selection and design, right? We're understanding site conditions, we're understanding this bigger picture, and we're very consciously selecting and supporting, basically planting plants we know are going to do better in the future. So this is really a big shift, right? We're sometimes planting things we normally wouldn't plant because we know that climate change is going to affect our gardens. And we're also doing things different to protect them against frost and adjusting planting times. So starting small, really key. Don't overdo it, and use the resources we have. This one is here today with the Regional Invasive Species Management table. So check this out, Gardening with Climate Smart Native Plants in the Northeast. It's a great resource for you because it actually lists out what are those best plants that you can use. Makes it easy. It's easy to follow, tells you what kind of conditions you need in your garden and what beneficials or animals it's going to benefit. It also has colors, so that's nice. Another really cool initiative, I check it out. It's brand new, the Future Forest Initiative at Cornell Botanic Gardens. You can get a full list of native tree and shrub species, and you can find that are going to do better in our changing climate conditions. So this is a great resource. Getting people to plant native trees, really critical again for carbon storage, but also just for our ability to get ahead of this in our own backyards. And then I feel like I'm repeating what everybody said today, but electric mowers, keeping them up high, talking about changing over from gas, of course, to something more manual. And then thinking about all the garden materials and their embodied energy that's used with them. All right, so this is in a nutshell what we've talked about today. Many similar things to what Jenny and others have talked about as well, but we're capturing water, we're supporting pollinators with a deep bench of plants so that you have many different shapes, sizes, times of years, reducing gas use and being aware of those invasive threats, and then just being proactive about protecting our plants and when and how we plant and harvest. So this is kind of everything in a nutshell. I'm just going to end on the note that reminding ourselves what it is that makes us really good at what we do. And I'm speaking to the master gardeners and the educators in the room. We have to rely on people who are our peers to get information and really believe it and trust it. And so especially when you're working with skeptics for things like climate change, we can work with folks by helping them understand how we're connected first. And so I hope that came through in this presentation. I encourage you to check out the Ecological Gardening in the Northeast for the more how-to. And also, if you're a master gardener or an educator at CCE, we have an advanced training in Moodle that you can look at that gives you lots of how-tos for some of those ecological gardening skills. So check out the curriculum. It's hopefully pretty easy to follow, and I hope you enjoyed it. And please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Ashley.
We have some time for questions.
So that last message you had up there about studies and how they would affect people aren't as effective as subjective evaluations of ideas and so forth.
Yeah.
Is that the reason when you started off
Mhm.
that you don't do these, in this manner, that you've got people working together? And how do you
Yep.
put groups together? Can you give me some
Yep.
insight on how many people work well in a group and
Sure.
that kind of thing?
Yeah, so again, I couldn't cover everything in this curriculum, but a lot of this is not about presenting. And those questions at the beginning were just a sample, but we have a number of activities that get people to work in small groups. I think that this curriculum is best with like a group of 15 or less, because you can have small group discussions. Again, the longer presentations, we have a number of activities where you actually get into it. Like you look at your garden design and you talk about what's there. You do a little site assessment. You understand what a systems thinker is. Like I said, there's one that's specifically looking at an audit where you like think, is this mitigation? Is this adaptation? So there's so many good things in this larger facilitators notebook that, again, if I had more time, 30 minutes just doesn't cut it. So if I can just get you interested in looking at it, I promise you there's a lot more here. And it really is based on that high quality adult education, because I can even tell you right from here, like you're putting yourself in the audience's shoes, right? You're asking them right away, what do you believe? What do you think about it? You're channeling the power of groups, right? You're acting and thinking differently in a group than you would individually. You're emphasizing solutions and benefits because nobody wants to just hear the bad news. And you're bringing that climate impact close to home. So I would integrate pictures of your local garden or bring examples from your local community into this presentation. Connecting climate change issues that matter to your audience. So once you hear where they all are at, then you connect to those individual issues they care about. And bring in stories, make it real to them. I think we can all relate to just what happened with the smoke last week, right? So I think bringing in a story like that, talking about how it impacted you, thinking about real world things that happen, helps to humanize climate change, which is really real for a lot of us. So thanks for bringing that up.